I call the Honourable Minister, Stephen Joyce.
Thank you, Mr Chair. So I'm going to make a couple of points if I can at this point, and I appreciate the support that the opposition has given to a number of the measures in this bill, but I am a bit concerned at the double standard they are now appear to be approaching in regards to young drivers versus the blood alcohol level. Firstly, if you look at the evidence and really what this bill is trying to achieve, and I think will make very strong inroads, is that our biggest problems on our roads, sadly, are our young drivers, where we have a very tragic situation. We have a 60% worse fatality rate in this country than in Australia. It's a shocking statistic that we all need to take some responsibility for, and high-risk drivers. And high-risk drivers are sadly, again, dominated by people who aren't just under or just over the legal blood alcohol limit, but actually well over the blood alcohol limit. And I take the point that the Honourable Member Shane Jones was making to a point when he told of the terrible story of the person who was blind drunk in Northland. We all have those stories. The point is that this person is obviously well over the current legal limit. And in terms of the youngsters that Honourable Shane Jones refers to, I actually agree with him entirely, which is why we have proposed a nil limit for young drivers. Not because we want to punish young drivers, but because we all know, partly from our distant memories, but also partly from our own children in our lives, that actually teenagers are not that good at making decisions about when to drink and when to drive. And we've had a number of tragic cases in this country where they have picked the least drunk teenager to drive home, with sadly horrible consequences. And by putting a nil limit, we've actually only got a 0.03 limit now for young people. By having a nil limit for young people and actually having it as an infringement penalty between the 0.0 and the 0.03, and of course the tolerance for things like mouthwash and all those things, we're sending a very straightforward message to the under-20s and saying, actually, if you have a drink, don't drive. That's the deal. And we're making it very straightforward and very black and white, because we're all conscious that we're all 10 foot high and bulletproof when we're young. But the contradiction in the opposition's position is that on the one hand they say, the polls say everybody should say that you should lower the adult blood alcohol limit, despite the fact that there is no evidence of the actual harm caused by drivers between 0.05 and 0.08 in this country. No evidence. And then they say, but they're not necessarily in favour of raising the driving age by a year, which is actually a more popular, if you're going to be populist, a more popular initiative in this country, right through rural and urban areas, than the 0.08 to 0.05 debate. So that's a bit of a contradiction in terms, particularly when we do know the evidence of the difficulties for young drivers. Sadly, we do. It's a 60% worse fatality rate in this country than overseas. Now, people do raise the issue of mobility for young drivers, and I completely understand that. But why is it so different to be giving a 14-year-old a drive down to the sports game, but suddenly it's not possible to do that for a 15-year-old? So I just don't buy that. I just think that you actually can take a young person until they reach the driving age. That's not the excuse. The question you have to ask yourself is, what is an appropriate age for young people to be driving? And there is a chart which was showed to the Select Committee in answer to Darian Fenton's concerns, and has been showed to all the members who have shown an interest in this House, which shows quite clearly that the younger you are, with the same level of experience, the higher accident rate that you have. And that's the reality of it. And in fact, there are many people that think the driving age in this country should be another year older again than what we're proposing in this bill today. So I think we've got to consider that very, very carefully, because there's another chart which we showed the Select Committee and which is in the High Risk Drivers Report, which is a very sad chart, and that is the number of passengers in vehicles that die at the hands of their young driver friends when they're out on their restricted licence or on their learner licence late at night in places like the Bay of Plenty, the Waikato, Auckland, the back of Hawke's Bay, where you've got young kids out there making bad decisions driving and taking, unfortunately, the lives of other kids with them. And I think we do actually have to make the call that we need a young driver package. It's not just one measure, a young driver package which says actually driving is more more responsible, involves more responsibility than you thought. And actually we do need to, Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable Minister, Stephen Joyce.
Sorry, we do need to take that step. So we've put together this young drivers package, which is about a zero limit for the under-20s. It's about changing the age to make it the same as Australia. It's also about toughening up the restricted licence so that they actually encourage to get 120 hours training. It's also looking at things like vehicle power restrictions, which we'll have a report later this year on. It's actually saying here's a whole package, because actually we don't want a 60% worse fatality rate with our young people on the roads than the Australians have. We just don't want that. In terms of the adult blood alcohol limit, Mr Chair, I'd like to raise one other matter. It was addressed at the time that the UK were also looking at lowering their limit from 0.08 to 0.05. The UK is an interesting place. It has half the road fatality rate in the UK on a same population basis as New Zealand. It's got one of the lowest in the world, but it has a 0.08 blood alcohol rate. They've got a 0.08 blood alcohol level in the UK. So they looked at it too. They said, well, maybe we should drop it to 0.05, because a lot of countries have 0.05. And they said, no, actually, they've taken the decision now. The decision is that it's high-risk drivers that are the problem, and it's high-risk drivers that we'll be focusing on. And we've taken the same decision in this country because the evidence is clear that if you look at the two areas, high-risk drivers and young drivers that are not already classified as high-risk drivers, together they comprise 53% of at-fault drivers in fatal crashes. More than half the at-fault drivers in fatal crashes are either high-risk drivers or young drivers. And by high-risk drivers, we mean people that are well over the blood alcohol limit, people that have had alcohol licence problems before, all those sorts of people. And they actually have an alcohol problem which turns up on the roads. That's the problem we're dealing with, an alcohol problem that unfortunately turns up on our roads. So the other initiative that this bill allows is alcohol interlocks, and I think that's a big step forward for this Parliament. The ability to provide a technological solution that in many cases will actually separate the drinker from their driving. And we actually have to try and do that. Unfortunately, we can't be at every driveway having somebody saying, no, you can go on, you can't go on. It's a very democratic place, the road. Everybody has access to it. But what we can say is that when you are the sort of person that once you've had a couple of drinks you can't make responsible decisions, then having an alcohol interlock in place will actually make that decision for you. And we've also, as Darian Fenton has pointed out, having this nil limit for repeat drink drivers. So, Mr Chair, I think it's a cohesive package. I have to say I'd ask the committee to keep real focus on young drivers, on that 60% worse fatality rate compared to Australia, which I think is very, very sad for this country, and also the real issues with adult drink driving, which are at the serious end of the spectrum. And what we're going to do is actually, once this bill is passed, is actually collect the actual data on actual harm caused by actual drivers between 0.05 and 0.08 over the next 2 years, and then we'll settle what has been an emotional and long-running debate in this country for a long time about whether the moving of the limit from 0.08 to 0.05 will actually make the difference to the road toll that the advocates for it say that they do. And a final word, if I may, Mr Chair, on those advocates. I understand that the Labor Party's view is that sometimes to achieve social change that you actually have to change the rules in other areas, because they like to do a little bit of that social engineering. But actually I think we're talking about transport here. It's actually about transport. It's about what's safe to do on the road. Right. And I think all those groups like Alcohol Health Watch and all those other groups, that ALAC and the rest, that want to use the road as a means for achieving wider societal change, well, good on them. But actually this is a transport issue that we need to deal with, and we need to deal with it on that basis, and we don't just punish people in the hope that if we really come down on them hard, then we'll change the alcohol culture in this country. If you want to change the alcohol culture in this country, that's fine, but there are many people that are quite happy and quite law-abiding, having a few drinks at home and aren't driving anywhere, and those people will not respond well to the suggestion that this is all about social engineering. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Well said. Excellent speech. Excellent speech.
I call